Cost of Kedarnath and Hemkund Sahibji ropeway projects 6,800 crore. The government approved two ropeway projects in Uttarakhand, Sonprayag to Kedarnath and Govind Ghat to Hemkund Sahibji. Sonprayag to Kedarnath and Govind Ghat to Hemkund Sahibji. The number of opposition figures on trial in Tunisia 14, 40. Number of proclaimed offenders arrested 61. Police have arrested 61 proclaimed offenders. Why has US President Donald Trump taken a dramatic shift when it comes to US's policy on Ukraine and NATO? Does the US still consider Russia as a systemic threat? European leaders support Are European leaders supportive of the US plan? What lies ahead for the Russia-Ukraine war? The Ukraine conflict has witnessed dramatic developments in the recent weeks. US President Donald Trump has brought in a 180-degree shift in US's policy towards the war. Disagreements between Kiev and Washington on how to end the war have led to unprecedented public spat between Ukraine's President Zelensky and Mr. Trump in the Oval Office, following which the US paused all military aid for the war-torn European nation. Within a day, Mr. Zelensky regretted the spat, announced Kyiv's readiness to declare a partial truce, and work with Mr. Trump to achieve lasting peace. Europe seems caught off guard as the geopolitical glacial plates are shifting fast. Russia is watching and waiting while the war grinds on. When Russian President Vladimir Putin launched the invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, he probably thought the war would be over within days. So did Ukraine's Western partners, including US, who vacated their embassies in Kiev right before the war began. But when the Ukraine, armed with US supplied weapons, denied a quick victory to the Russians, the West stepped in. The US, under the Biden administration, adopted a two-pronged approach towards the war, imposed biting sanctions on Russia to weaken its war machinery and economy, and arm Ukraine to teeth the fight against Russians on the battlefield. We want to Russia weakened, Mr. Biden's Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said. This approach was relatively successful in the war's initial phase. By September 22, Russian troops were forced to withdraw from settlements that had captured from Kharkiv Oblast in the northeast. In November, Russia pulled back from the Kherson city and parts of Mykolaiv on the right bank of the Dnipro River in the south. But in between Russia's retreats from Kharkiv and Kherson, President Vladimir Putin has doubled down on the war. He announced four Ukrainian oblasts, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson, and announced a partial mobilization. The message from Kremlin was that it was ready to fight a long war. On the economy front, Mr. Putin pivoted towards Asia, where the huge markets of China, India, and others helped Moscow offset the impact of sanctions. In 2023, Russia gradually turned the tide of the war, inch by bloody inch. It took Soledar in January and Bakhmut in May. After the months-long campaign in 2024, Russia expelled its battlefield advances by capturing Advika in February, Kranso Rivka in September, and Vuhledar in October. At no point since 2023 had Ukraine seemed capable of defeating the Russians and recapturing lost territories. In June 2023, Ukraine launched a much-awaited counter-offensive with advanced Western weapons in the south, but it fizzled out in the face of Russia's dodged defense. In August 2024, Ukraine captured some 1,000 kilometers of Russian territory, the Kursk region, in a surprise attack aimed at mounting pressure on Russia's advancing troops in the east. But Russia refused to walk into the trap and pressed ahead with its offensive in the east, soft belly of Ukraine's resistance. In 2024, Russian forces captured an estimated 4,000 square kilometers in both Ukraine and Russia's Kursk. In 2025, Russian troops seized Velika, Novoselka, and parts of Torsk. They have now been trying to encircle Pokrovsk. Ukraine in recent months stepped up drone and missile attacks deep inside Russian territory as well as in the Black Sea, hurting Russia's security. But on the battlefield, it has been on the back foot for over 2 years. Mr. Trump has promised during the election campaign that he would bring the war to a quick end. After taking office in January, he moved fast. First, Pete Hegseth, the US Defense Secretary, told Ukraine Defense Contact Group, an alliance of 57 countries and EU put in place by the Biden administration to help Kyiv, that Ukraine would not become NATO member. He also ruled out American security guarantees for Ukraine and said any European guarantee would not be covered under NATO's collective security clause. Immediately after Mr. Hegseth's comment, Mr. Trump held telephone call with Mr. Putin. Within days, Russia and the US had two rounds of direct talks. Mr. Trump seems to determined to reset America's ties with Russia. One explanation for this approach is that US doesn't see Russia as a threat anymore. The US in that sees breaking from the Second World War transatlantic consensus and is going back to the pre-First World War offshore balancing. The US is protected by the world's two greatest oceans and shares border with two meek powers in the south and north. In this realist worldview, China is a systemic threat to US's primacy, and Sino-Russian alliance could make that threat perilous. It would entail a reorientation of America's policy towards Russia in a reverse order of what Henry Kissinger did in 1970s, when he and President Richard Nixon exploited the Sino-Soviet split and reached out to Beijing. In this grand reset plan, Ukraine is just a hindrance, Mr. Trump believes. Ukraine can't win the war, even if with American support, and wants Kyiv to take the deal the US plans to make with Russia and end the war. Europe seems to be struggling to come to terms with what's happening. When the Ukraine was promised NATO membership by the US President George W. Bush in 2008, Germany and France were hesitant. After Russia annexed Crimea in 2014 and supported a rebellion in Ukraine's east, Germany and France played a role in negotiating the Minsk process to bring peace to Ukraine. But US was not keen on the Minsk Accords and continued to back Ukraine militarily. Europe seems to be struggling to come to terms with what's happening. When Ukraine was promised NATO membership by US President George W. Bush in 2008, Germany and France were hesitant. After Russia annexed Crimea and supported a rebellion in the Ukraine's east, Germany and France played a role in negotiating the Minsk process to bring peace in Ukraine. But the US was not very keen on the Minsk Accords and continued to back Ukraine militarily. No side, Kiev the separatist in the east, and Russia implemented the accords. Kiev, the separatist in the east, and Russia implemented the accords. The crisis escalated into full-blown war on Europe's watch. After the war began, Europe had to pay huge economic cost. Nord Stream pipeline linking Russia across the Baltic Sea to Germany was blown away, most likely by the Ukrainians, according to American media. Stoppage of the flow of cheap Russian gas triggered a cost of living crisis and deindustrialization, which deepened public antipathy towards Europe's political establishment in several countries. For example, Germany is in recession for the third consecutive year, and German far right is ascendant. And now the US, which was in the lead of pro-Ukraine alliance, is breaking with the policy and directly talking to Russia, excluding both Ukraine and Europe. European countries have called the two summit-level meetings since Trump came to office and promised to do more to help Ukraine. But the question is whether Europe which itself is divided, has the capacity to provide security guarantees to Ukraine without America's backing. At present, Europe doesn't have many options but to go on with the American plan. Europe also has bigger problems than Ukraine. It is worried about the future of NATO as the Trump administration is reorienting America's post war foreign and security policy. Ukraine has lost more than 20% of its territories to Russia, and tens of thousands of soldiers were killed in the war. Millions of Ukrainians have fled the country. Its economy is in shambles. Energy sector is facing a major crisis because of Russia's repeated bombing of its infrastructure. Country is dependent on external supplies to meet at least half of its weapon requirements, including artillery and ammunition. Ukraine is facing a manpower crunch on the battlefield, and the country is therefore in dire straits. The US says it's not practical to expect Ukraine to retake its lost territories. The Ukrainians and the Europeans would grudgingly agree. The US promised NATO membership to Ukraine in 2008. In 2025, the US says Ukraine can forget about NATO membership. The Ukraine wants at least security guarantees, but America is reluctant to provide any such security guarantee. So if Ukraine continues the war, it could lose more territories. If it stops the war, it will have to do so on the terms set by Russia and America. In the outset, no good options left for Mr. Zelensky and his generals. Great powers fight proxy wars when their interests clash, and great power reset ties when their interests align. The pawns and proxies suffer. Ukraine's story is no different. Stories of political incarceration, censorship, and unlikely solidarity. Writer documents the lives and thoughts of political dissenters, particularly those who have served jail terms for their beliefs, to keep the conversation going on human rights, justice, freedom of speech, and prison reforms. Under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A of the Constitution, which guarantees freedom of speech and expression, citizens have the right to dissent. But throughout Indian history, jails have burst with political dissenters. Dissent is not just about anger, about having a rival articulation of the world, argues American historian Timothy Snyder. Yet, in a practicing democracy like India with a constitutional government, rule of law, and an independent judiciary, the government of the day often cracks down on dissent using political imprisonment as a tool to crush it. But can dark prison walls shut out those who are fighting for a better world, particularly for the vulnerable sections of the society? The voices of political activism need to be heard, and several books have documented the experience of prisoners. The first night in jail is reputed to be the hardest. After that, you learn how to survive, although though many prisoners carry lifelong scars. The absurdity of life counts because not many topics are more heated and sources more tedious than perhaps the humiliating treatment meted out to the prisoners. Apart from revealing the loss and struggles of prisoners, Kohatkar's book turns the attention to the injustices meted out to thousands of under trials through the narratives of her interviewees who talk about overcrowding, adversely affected living conditions, compromised prison management system, and limited access for prisoners to meaningful programs related to rehabilitation. The adaptation to prison life is never easy, with authorities placing impediments and denying even basic rights like reading. Newspapers are handed out after snipping the articles that the authorities don't want the prisoners to read. There seems to be some sort of central direction to all the prison authorities to act tough with Maoist prisoners. 61 years ago, the renowned boxer Cassius Clay was renamed Muhammad Ali who will apologize to the Himalayas. Recently, Norway's parliament issued formal apology for its assimilation policies targeting the Sami, Kwan, and Forestfen peoples. These policies, known as Norwegianization, were implemented between 1850s and 1960 to suppress indigenous languages and cultures. Alongside the apology, government proposed measures to address the ongoing discrimination, such as protecting indigenous languages and monitoring inclusion efforts. Although Norway has repealed discriminatory laws, established symbolic rights such as Sami parliament, challenges persist. The experiences of Nordic and Himalayan communities share some parallels. Himalayan region spans 2,500 kilometers from Afghanistan to northeast India and contains the world's largest ice reserves after two poles. Like the Nordics, Himalayan communities faced climate-induced disasters and centuries of resource exploitation. The region is home to 52 million people from various tribes, clans, ethnicities, and religions. These include Gaddis and Kinnors in Himachal Pradesh, Lepchas, Bhutias, and Mons in Sikkim, and Ladakh. Diverse groups in Arunachal Pradesh, such as Abor, Akka, Apatani, and Mishmi. The Khas, Kalash, and other ethnic groups span Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Nepal. These communities have faced waves of assimilation through colonialism, post independence, nation building, and neoliberal economic policies. During British rule, trade and forest laws impacted Himalayan communities. In the northeast, tribes were coerced into accepting colonial trade terms involving goods such as tea, gold, silk, and opium. In some regions, trade blockades devastated local economies. According to ASR Foreign Proceedings, an interesting result of blockade of 1874, as reported by Colonel Graham, revealed cultural operations of the hill people were suspended because they could not procure iron from the plains to manufacture Dow Jones, and marriages stopped as the supply of silk clothes was blocked. Likewise, in Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, forest laws were enacted to ensure regular supply of timber for laying the railway lines in India. An article underlines that between 1853 and 1910, more than 80,000 kilometers of track were laid in the subcontinent. Great chunks of forest were destroyed to meet the demand of railway sleepers. The Sal forest of Garhwal and Kumaon, for example, were felled in even to desolation. After India's independence, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru advocated for respecting tribal ways of life. Mr. Nehru pointed out, I am not at all sure which is a better way of living, the tribal or own. In some respects, I am quite certain theirs is better. Therefore, it is grossly presumptuous on our part to approach them with an air of superiority or to tell them what to do or not to do. There is no point in trying to make them a second rate copy of ourselves. This humanistic approach influenced policies for about 15 years. However, by the fifth and the sixth year plans, rapid resource exploitation in tribal regions began to disrupt local ecosystems and cultures. The 1990s marked a significant shift in Himalayan governance. Unlike in the Indian state, which had some industrial base, Himalayan states emerged due to geographical and multi ethnic considerations. This era introduced fiscal policies that pressured states into to generate their own revenue. Tourism and hydropower became dominant economic activities, leading to extensive environmental degradation and cultural erosion. Hydropower projects, in particular, exemplify the exploitative development model. In March 2015, then Chief Minister Nabam Tuki said, after commissioning the just three ongoing hydropower projects in the state, that it would earn 445 crore annually as revenue. from 12% power supplied by the projects free for the state to sell. At the completion of all ongoing projects, Arunachal Pradesh would need 40% of India's power demand and graduate from severe dependence to financial self-sufficiency. Hydropower projects in particular exemplify the exploitative development model. In March 2015, then Chief Minister Nabam Teki said after commissioning of just three ongoing hydropower projects in the state, it would earn 445 crore annually as revenue from 12% power supplied by the projects free for all to sell. At the completion of all ongoing projects, Arunachal Pradesh would meet 40% of India's power demand and graduate from severe dependence to financial self-sufficiency. This is another feature of assimilation. However, such projects often bypass local laws, undermining tribal land ownership governed by customary practices. Despite legal protections, nexus of bureaucrats, politicians, and corporations has facilitated large-scale land acquisition for hydropower development. This hydrocriminality, as described by civil society groups, exemplifies the prioritization of economic growth over cultural preservation and environmental sustainability. Traditional practices and ethnic diversity in the Himalayan region are increasingly marginalized in favor of profit driven initiatives. Norway's apology to the Sami people highlights the importance of acknowledging the historical injustices and committing to reconciliation. For the Himalayan region, a similar acknowledgement is long overdue. The exploitation of natural resources and erosion of cultural identities demand accountability and a shift towards sustainable inclusive development. While Norway's federal government has taken a step towards justice, the question remains who will apologize to the Himalayas. With laws to deal with obscenity, new regulations may be superfluous in suggesting that the government should come with regulatory measures to prevent vulgarity or perversity. In the name of human humor being aired, the Supreme Court has expanded the scope of petitions by YouTubers caught in a criminal case or alleged obscenity in a digital program. The court has sounded the right note by calling for a discussion among stakeholders on regulations that would not impose impinge the freedom of on the freedom of speech and expression and will be within the framework of reasonable restrictions permitted in the constitution. However, such regulations may be superfluous as existing laws provide for dealing with possible obscenity or vulgarity in the electronic and digital content, and those associated with controversial program India's Got Latent are facing FIRs, have sought protection from arrest, show that present regulations may be sufficient. Under the Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita, display of content in electronic form shall be deemed to be obscene if it is lascivious and appeals to be prurient interest and is punishable offence. Similar penal provisions are available in the IT Act. The program code under the Cable Television Network rules prohibits programs that offend decency. Among other things, the IT Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code Rules 21 provide for age-based classification, three-tier system of grievance redress, under which users could approach the platform's self-regulatory body and a government interim interdepartmental committee. The debate between clean and dirty humor is age-old, but the distinction is well understood. It is only in the context of public outrage over specific instances of obscenity or vulgarity that voices are raised about the need to maintain decency and morality. In this case, the folly of the participants in making sexually perverse comments is matched by the zeal of the complainants and the police, mainly because of the content being leaked outside a paying audience. The participants may have thus rendered themselves vulnerable to prosecution, but a more mature society should consider whether anyone should go to prison for such a verbal offense. The tendency to get the police to file FIRs wherever someone complains is also to be deprecated. The Internet's universal reach should not become an excuse to confer universal jurisdiction. This often takes the case to the court, as those names in such FIRs want multiple cases to be clubbed, leading to attention and widening of the debate. An extreme case such as this does evoke extreme reactions, but law enforcement and legal institutions should not be overzealous in their response. Ashas need adequate remuneration to be effective in their role. When an acronym was coined to refer a newly created cadre of health workers for the country, as political gestures are wont to, care was taken to ensure the work invoked a sense of promise. The government decided to call them accredited social health activists. In 2005, Central launched National Rural Health Mission and nominated ASHAs to be the link between community and the public healthcare delivery system. Today, there are over a million ASHAs across the country, and each one is formally esconded as the fulcrum of public healthcare in their area of operation in rural India. They now perform a full complement of functions: record birth and death data, implement interventions in non-communicable diseases, neglected tropical diseases, and serve a crucial reproductive, maternal, newborn, child, and adolescent health roles, among others. Monitoring health, hygiene, and sanitation is in the communities also upon them. The role that the ASHAs played during the COVID-19 pandemic as healthcare workers trusted by the community raised their profile significantly, and humble Indian health worker went global. The Ashas were chosen for the WHO's Director General's Global Health Leaders Award in 2022 and were recognized by the outstanding contribution towards protecting and promoting health. A recent PLOS Global Public Health study established that likelihood women access maternal services and have a safer institution-based delivery. And yet 20 years after ASHAs were created, workers are still on the streets protesting for fair wages and equitable treatment. The flaw lies in the way that were designed at inception as volunteers. As such, they remain eligible only for a meager fixed salary for the center and rest of the compensation provided as incentive against a deliverable, for instance, or for facilitating an institutional birth. As per estimates, an ASHA worker can make anything between 5,000 and 15,000 a month. In 2018, government approved an ASHA benefit package providing coverage for accidents, deaths, and disability. But the truth is, there is heavy load on the ASHAs. They work long hours, travel long distances, frequently miss meals, and have little time to take care of their own health needs. It is high time that the government fulfills the hopes of its warriors of hope. It looks as if the case of playing musical chairs for Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. When it comes to dealing with United States, Mr. Zelensky is now struggling for survival with the shadow of economic woes over him. This is also a case of fast developing diplomacy. However, people of Ukraine deserve peace. The Ukraine's president's ardent plea to the American president that he wants to make things right and is willing to work under Mr. Trump's strong leadership to secure a lasting peace should be viewed in a proper perspective. One waits to see what extent of president of the most powerful country will accede to a request of a president of comparatively smaller country who is suffering immense hardships. Mr. Zelensky's request is a direct victory for President Trump. Mr. Trump was right. Why should American taxpayers' money be wasted in mindless war? Mr. Trump should also have a look at the workings of the NATO, which is the root cause for most of the wars across the globe. Wonder why Europe's leaders are hell-bent on continuing the war. A growing population was seen as an impediment to economic progress in the 1970s. Government policies favored citizens and SOPs for adopting population control measures. But ever since the issue of delimitation has come up, many in the political class are advising to have more children. The chief ministers of certain states are urging citizens to have more children so as to have more electoral representatives. It is wise to be preferring representation over Is it wise to be preferring representation over economic progress? Team India did well to bury the ghost of the 23 World Cup loss at Ahmedabad and record a memorable victory at Dubai. The charge that men in blue have the same venue advantage sounds hollow since all the teams playing are used to Dubai. DeepSeek, Chinese company, has shaken the global tech industry. How does DeepSeek's innovation affect India's dominance in IT? The core of DeepSeek's success lies in its ability to overcome the limitations of expensive computational power. The disruption is reminiscent of India's long standing dominance in the global IT sector, which has been built on its competitive edge through an abundant supply of skilled, English speaking, and cost effective labor. However, with generative AI eliminating both skill and language barriers, DeepSeek's innovation has accelerated the rise of cheaper, more efficient alternatives that can replace low cost IT service providers. DeepSeek's breakthrough not only strengthens China's position in AI but also opens the door for broader advancement in IT services through AI driven automation. The Indian IT sector, which has long thrived on cost effective labor led service models, now face a reality where AI can replace repetitive low value tasks. What can organizations learn? The biggest lesson is the power of research and development. Treated AI product development as a sidekick rather than a core activity. Yet this investment has paid off tremendously. Companies should foster a environment that encourages research, experimentation, and a tolerance for failure. India lags behind R&D in investment, a critical factor for sustaining long-term economic investment. India's gross domestic expenditure on R&D remains below 1% of GDP, far lower than the other major economies including China. According to UNESCO Institute of Statistics, China invested around 2.43% of GDP in R&D as of 2021. One major policy misstep has been the persistent debate of over whether to prioritize manufacturing or services. This false dichotomy overlooks the strong linkages between the two sectors. Manufacturing and services complement each other and thrive together. Instead of choosing one over the other, India must adopt a balanced approach that fosters growth in both areas. India's dominance in IT is now under threat. This focus should shift towards building a workforce that enhances productivity through AI rather than being replaced by it. As a top priority for the future, India must ensure it does not fall behind in the next major technological frontier, which is quantum computing race. Advancements in quantum technology will be crucial for maintaining technological leadership in the coming decades. Over-centralization threatens federal health policy. The recent Supreme Court judgment Dr. Tanvi Behel versus Shreya Goyal 2025, which struck down domicile-based reservations in postgraduate medical admissions in respective medical colleges in states, marks a significant shift in India's medical education policy. Ruling holds that reservations violate Article 14 of the Constitution, dismantles a mechanism that states have long relied upon to ensure a stable medical workforce suited to public health needs. While upholding meritocracy, it misapprehends the complex relationship between medical education policies and state public health planning. Domicile-based reservations serve a crucial function in aligning state investment in medical education with healthcare personnel retention. By striking down domicile quotas, the judgment weakens the incentive for states to invest in medical education. A well functioning system of competitive federalism encourages states to develop robust institutions to attract and retain talent. However, if states cannot ensure that their investment translates into local specialist workforce, the incentive to fund medical education diminishes. This stands in contrast to premier central institutions. As such, AIMS, PGI, etc. Article 21 of the Indian Constitution guarantees right to life, including access to adequate health care. The court's insistence on a rigid meritocratic framework ignores the structural inequities inherent in India's medical entrance system. An analysis of the NEET PG reveals a significant flaw in how merit is assessed, including instances where candidates with negative marks qualify due to percentile based cutoffs. So, need for reconsideration. While the court's ruling follows precedent from Pradeep Jain and the Constitution Bench, it merits re-evaluation. The original framework, which drew a rigid line between undergraduate and postgraduate, was formulated in a different healthcare landscape. Today, retaining specialists within state health systems is more pressing than ever. No response from India on Trump tariffs so far. US to place reciprocal tariffs from April 2. Bofor's case, a CBI sends judicial request to US seeking information from private investigator. Kukizo body opposes group march to hills. The Kukizos are concentrated largely in the lower hills surrounding the valley. The Kukizo organization said the march to the hills was a bad idea. There will be no free movement in Kukizo areas before the establishment of a separate administration or a union territory with a legislature for the Kukizo people. Kukizo says they can no longer coexist with the Meiteis and see a separate administration as the only solution to the conflict. Meiteis are against the bifurcation of Manipur. Those who have inflicted suffering on the Kukizo people, those who have taken innocent lives, and those who continue to deny our fundamental rights will not be allowed to free passage into our lands. Another organization named Young Kuki said proposed march was nothing but a hostile provocation against the Kukizo people. Reacting to the statements from the Chinkuki groups, the Meitei Heritage Society, their response would put beyond any doubt what was suspected. Ropeway projects in Kedarnath, Hemkund Sahib, Kids Center North. DRDO conducts trials for life support system for LCA Tejas. Indigenous Integrated Life Support System. For Livestock Health Project. Space debris lacks a universally accepted legal definition, thus, legal disputes often hinge on whether a piece of debris qualifies as a space object under the Convention for International Liability of Damage Caused by Space Object 1972. US will impose reciprocal tariffs from April to Trump. So that's all for today. See you in the next one.